My daughter is having an affair with the married neighbor. I wasn't expecting to find my daughter sneaking around in the middle of the night. It was one of those restless evenings, where sleep felt just out of reach. The house was dead silent, and I slipped downstairs for a glass of water. But as I stood at the sink, sipping quietly, something outside caught my eye. Movement. I squinted through the window and saw her Emily coming out of our neighbor Trevor's house, her hair messy, her clothes rumpled like she'd just thrown them on. I froze. At first, my mind couldn't connect the dots. Trevor and Melissa were our friends. Trevor was 30 and married with a kid. Emily was just 21. What the hell was she doing there at 3 in the morning? I watched as she slipped across the yard, her bare feet leaving faint tracks in the dew-covered grass. She crept through our basement door, thinking no one had seen her. But I had. I stood there, water glass in hand, my heart pounding. How long had this been going on? What had I missed? I couldn't confront her that night. I was too stunned, too confused, so I sat with it, replaying the moment in my head. By morning, the confusion turned into anger, a searing, white-hot fury. I marched down to Emily's room, threw the door open, and found her sprawled on her bed, scrolling through her phone like she didn't have a care in the world. "We need to talk," I said, my voice shaking with anger. She didn't even look up. "About what?" she asked lazily, clearly unaware of what was coming. "I saw you last night," I spat out. "Sneaking out of Trevor's house at 3 a.m. What the hell is going on?" She blinked, her casual demeanor shifting as she realized I wasn't bluffing. "Mom, I don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, don't play dumb with me, Emily. I saw you. I watched you come out of their house. Are you having an affair with him?" She hesitated. For a moment, I thought she might lie to me again, but then something in her broke. "Okay, fine," she snapped, throwing her phone aside. "Yes, I've been seeing him. But it's not like that." "Not like what?" I cut her off, my voice louder than I intended. "He's married, Emily." "Married? You've been babysitting their kid, and you're sleeping with him? How can you justify this?" "I didn't plan it, okay?" she shot back, her face flushing with guilt and frustration. "It just happened. He told me it's over between him and Melissa. They're going to split up." I stared at her, disbelief flooding my system. "And you believed him? You really think he's going to leave his wife for you? Jesus, Emily. Do you know what you've done?" She didn't answer, and the silence between us felt suffocating. I could feel my heart hammering in my chest, a mixture of disgust and betrayal swirling in my gut. "You need to tell Melissa," I said finally, my voice shaking with barely controlled anger. "You need to tell her, or you're moving out of this house. I won't have you destroying their marriage under my roof." Her eyes widened in shock. "You want me to move out?" "Damn right, I do. If you can't face what you've done, you're not staying here." Emily stormed past me, slamming her door behind her. I stood there, my hands shaking, wondering how we'd gotten to this point. How had I missed the signs? The next few days were unbearable. My husband, Paul, was clueless. He thought I was being too hard on Emily, that I was making a mountain out of a molehill. But he didn't know what I knew. And Emily? She acted like nothing had happened, refusing to speak to me unless absolutely necessary. I kept watching. Every night, I would sit by the window, hoping that Trevor would show his face, daring him to slip over to our house. And it wasn't long before he did. One night, while Paul was snoring away upstairs, I saw a figure slipping across the lawn. Trevor. I could feel the rage boiling in my chest as I watched him head straight for our basement door. He knocked quietly twice, 3 times before Emily let him in. She was waiting for him, knowing damn well what she was doing. My own daughter was sneaking a married man into my home in the middle of the night. I knew I had to do something. The next day, I called Melissa. My hands shook as I dialed her number, but I didn't hesitate. She deserved to know. "Hey, Melissa," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "There's something you need to know about Trevor. And Emily." There was silence on the other end, followed by a soft, "What do you mean?" I told her everything. The late nights, the sneaking around, the affair. I expected tears, maybe even anger. But Melissa's response was something else entirely. "I already know," she said calmly. What? I know, she repeated. I've known for months. Her calmness unnerved me. And you haven't done anything about it. She sighed. It's complicated, Claire. It's not as simple as just throwing him out. Trevor, he has his issues. I've tried to keep our family together, but, it's more than just this. What do you mean, more? I mean, Trevor has had other affairs before Emily. I've dealt with this before. He always promises to change, but he doesn't. I've been waiting for the right moment, but honestly, I'm not sure there ever will be one. I sat there, stunned. I had expected shock, outrage, anything but this cold acceptance. Are you okay with this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. No, of course not, she said bitterly. But I've got my daughter to think about. I'm trying to keep things stable for her. It's not as simple as walking away. I hung up the phone, feeling sick. Melissa knew. She had known all along. And I had no idea how deep this rabbit hole went. That night, I confronted Emily again, telling her what Melissa had said. She just looked at me, her eyes filled with anger and defiance. You had no right to call her, she hissed. This is my life. Your life? You're living in my house, Emily. And you've thrown yourself into this mess like it's nothing. But it wasn't just a mess anymore. It was something darker. Emily stopped speaking to me entirely after that. She began spending more and more time with Trevor, sneaking him in almost every night. And each time I saw him, I felt my grip on the situation slipping away. Until one night, when everything came crashing down. I heard the screaming first. It was coming from the backyard. I rushed downstairs, heart pounding, and saw Emily standing on the porch, screaming at Trevor, who was pacing the lawn, his hands in his hair. They were shouting at each other, their words muffled by the distance. But then, Emily shoved him hard, and he grabbed her arm. She yanked away, tears streaming down her face. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I knew the argument was about something far more serious than just their affair. I watched in horror as Trevor lunged toward her, and without thinking, I threw open the door and rushed outside. Get away from her! I shouted, adrenaline surging through me. Trevor stepped back, his face a mask of guilt and fury. Emily looked at me, her face streaked with tears. Mom, please, just stay out of it, she begged. But I couldn't stay out of it anymore. Whatever twisted web they had created was unraveling, and it was pulling us all down with it. Trevor left that night, and Emily locked herself in her room. I knew then that this wasn't just about an affair. There were secrets here, secrets that Trevor and Emily had kept hidden from me, from Melissa, from everyone. And I wasn't sure I was ready for the truth. That morning, Paul and I sat at the kitchen table, and I laid everything out for him. For a man who usually remained calm in difficult situations, the moment the full scope of Emily's affair with Trevor hit him, his face hardened. But instead of rushing to act, he thought carefully, his brow furrowed in concentration. He wasn't just angry, he was calculating the best way to handle this. Claire, he said finally, his voice steady but firm, we can't just let this continue. But storming over there and punching the guy isn't going to fix anything. We need to protect Emily and make sure Trevor pays for this in a way that sticks. I nodded. I agree. But how? Paul sighed, his fingers tapping the table. We'll confront Trevor, but we have to make sure he's trapped. First, we need to talk to Emily and get her on our side. If she keeps defending him, there's no way this ends well. We called Emily down to the kitchen. She walked in, tense, clearly expecting another lecture. But Paul's approach surprised her. Instead of yelling, he spoke calmly but with a controlled intensity that showed he wasn't playing games. Emily, listen carefully, Paul began, his eyes locking onto hers. We know what's been going on between you and Trevor. I'm not going to waste time being angry with you right now. But you need to understand something very important, Trevor is using you. He's been lying to you, to his wife, and he's going to throw you aside when it's convenient for him. Men like him don't change. Emily shifted in her chair, uncomfortable. Dad, you don't understand. No, Paul cut her off, his voice sharp but controlled. I do understand. He's not the first man to have an affair, and he certainly won't be the last. He's telling you what you want to hear because it benefits him. But what's he done for you, really? Has he promised to leave Melissa? Has he made any real moves? Or is he just keeping you around for when it's convenient? Emily didn't have an answer. I could see the doubt creeping into her face as Paul's words sank in. He's never leaving her, Emily, I added quietly. I called Melissa. She's known about the affair for months. He's done this before. He's not leaving her because he doesn't have to. He gets to keep you on the side while pretending to be a family man. And when it all falls apart, you'll be the one left with nothing. Tears welled up in Emily's eyes. I didn't want to believe it, but I guess I knew. Paul softened a bit, seeing her breaking. You're our daughter. We want what's best for you. And this? This isn't it. But we're not letting him manipulate you anymore. We're going to deal with Trevor, but you have to help us. Are you ready to walk away from him? Emily hesitated, then nodded slowly. Yeah. I'm done with him. Paul put his hand on her shoulder. Good. Now, let's finish this. That afternoon, we drove to Trevor's house. Melissa wasn't home. Emily had already confirmed she'd be out of town for the weekend. When Trevor opened the door, his face lit up at first when he saw Emily, but it quickly darkened when he noticed Paul and me behind her. Trevor, Paul said evenly, his voice carrying a subtle warning, we need to talk. Trevor hesitated but stepped aside to let us in. Once we were inside, Paul wasted no time. I'm not going to drag this out. You're going to leave Emily alone. No more calls, no more meetings, no more sneaking into my house in the middle of the night. This ends now. Trevor's eyes flickered with a mixture of fear and arrogance. He leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. Emily's an adult, he said with a smirk. She makes her own decisions. I don't think you have any right to tell her what to do. Paul didn't react to the bait. Instead, he took a step forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm. Oh, I have every right. You've been sneaking into my house, lying to my daughter, lying to your wife, and using my family like your personal playground. That stops now. Trevor chuckled, but it was forced. What are you gonna do? Call the cops? No, we won't need the cops, Paul said, his eyes cold. But I've already spoken to some people at the firm where you work. I've made sure they know all about your little extracurricular activities. They weren't happy to hear that their family man is risking their reputation. I saw Trevor's face pale a little. You, what? Paul leaned in closer, his voice barely above a whisper. And if you think this is the worst of it, just wait. I've also been in touch with Melissa. She's not as blind as you think. Divorce papers are coming soon, and when she's done with you, you'll be lucky if you can afford an apartment, let alone your cushy lifestyle. You're about to lose everything, Trevor. And if you come near my daughter again, I'll make sure there's nothing left. For the first time, Trevor looked genuinely scared. His hands trembled as he tried to keep up the facade, but it was cracking. Paul stepped back, giving him space, his work done. I could see Trevor struggling to find words, but nothing came out. Emily stood quietly behind us, watching the man she had thought she loved crumble under the weight of the truth. She didn't say a word, but I saw the finality in her eyes. She was done with him. As we turned to leave, I glanced back at Trevor. He was slumped against the wall, his face ashen, realizing that his life was falling apart. And it was only the beginning. In the following weeks, everything Paul had predicted came to pass. Melissa filed for divorce and took their daughter with her. She had her lawyer work out a deal that left Trevor with almost nothing. He lost the house, the car, and most of his assets in the settlement. His employer, after hearing about the scandal, quietly pushed him out. Trevor, once the picture of suburban success, was left scrambling for work, moving into a rundown apartment with nothing but his shattered pride. As for Emily, it took time, but she started rebuilding her life. She stayed with us for a while, and slowly, she began to open up about how Trevor had manipulated her. It wasn't easy, but with support, she started healing, finding her own path again. She cut all ties with him, and the more distance she gained, the clearer she saw how toxic the relationship had been. Paul and I stood by her, stronger than ever. We had taken back our daughter and broken the hold Trevor had over her. And while Trevor's downfall was brutal, it was a fate he had brought upon himself. He was left with nothing, a man who had tried to have it all but lost everything in the end. And that, in the end, was justice.